Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. The International Criminal Court in The Hague, which has operated for less than 20 years, is causing Israel quite a headache. Its chief prosecutor has referred to the governing body several issues which have to do with both jurisdiction and substance, with a negative impact on Israeli civilian and military leaders. Is this really a dangerous new front for Israel, or should it be seen as marginal in comparison to other threats facing it? To analyze this question, we're joined here in the studio by Dr. Hilly Moodrick-Even Khen, who is a lecturer of international law at Ariel University. Welcome. I'd like us to welcome our TV7 analyst, Mr. Amir Oren, and Professor Robbie Sabel, who is also a professor of international law at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Welcome. Mr. Oren, give us a broader understanding on the latest developments pertaining to this ICC investigation.
We have always been endlessly quoting the late General von Clausewitz regarding war being the continuation of policy by other means. And now law, or as some people call it, lawfare, is the continuation of warfare by other means. The Arab countries, with the exception of Jordan and Egypt, which signed peace agreements with Israel, are still technically at war with Israel. They have signed armistice agreements, some of them, not Iraq, but those neighboring Israel, but they have not fully acquiesced with the existence of Israel. So they are finding some other means, some diplomatic, some economic, and probably the latest dating back to 1998 or 2002, depending on what you want to see as the reference point. Now it's the International Criminal Court, which is in Hague. It is not the International Court of Justice, but it has other powers. And because the so-called State of Palestine has been accepted by this court as a party, it is both exposed to the same penalties which can be found against any member, and it is also able to bring charges or allegations against Israel. And so Israel is now faced with its usual dilemma, whether to take part in proceedings which are obviously biased against it, or leave the floor to others to pass judgment on it.
Not to forget that Israel is not a signatory of the Rome Statute. Dr. Moodrick-Even Khen, the latest investigation pertains to continued Israeli settlement construction in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and it is derived primarily from UN Security Council Resolution 2334, which deemed those activities by Israel as illegal and was, of course, not vetoed by the United States because it happened in 2016 on the 23rd of December, when it was still under the Obama administration that wanted to somehow thwart Israeli efforts to maintain its territory. How do you perceive the current situation that Israel has arrived at? Also considering the fact that it is backed by the United States, who lately came out, of course, with a public statement by its Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, who said that Israeli construction in the West Bank and East Jerusalem are not per se illegal under international law or inconsistent under international law. What is Israel's actually line of defense here?
Well, first I would like to mention that the ICC prosecutor has not yet opened an investigation. It is not an investigation. It is still in the process of a preliminary examination, which
are 90 days until.
No, but it would now the prosecutor would now apply the court for an opinion of whether or decision. I mean, whether it can proceed into an investigation and whether the court in fact has jurisdiction. This is quite peculiar because, as Amir Oren just said, the ICC has accepted the Palestinian Authority as a member state, and now the question runs again and now the question is again whether the ICC has jurisdiction because there are doubts of whether the ICC, of whether the Palestinian Authority is a state. So I don't think Israel now faces these specific questions yet. Of course, there is a risk that the pretrial chamber would allow to proceed into an investigation, and then Israel would have to consider its actions. But right now, I'm not sure it has arrived to this point.
Professor Sabel?
Yes.
How would you perceive the situation?
I'd like to say that from the outset, Israel supported the idea of an international criminal court. We feel that war criminals should be tried if they're not tried by their own country. What disappoints us and hurts us here is it's become politicized, because the issue here is not a crime. The preamble to the Charter of the Rome talks about acts that shock the conscience of humanity. Building houses on an empty hill in the West Bank may not be politically wise, that's something else, but it doesn't shock. In other words, what they've dealt with up to now is mass murders, mass rapes, and here it's a purely political issue. What will be the borders between Israel and a future Palestinian entity? And they've entered into a field they shouldn't have entered. It's become a political issue instead of a criminal issue, and that's why we're going to fight it as far as we can, because we think it's an abuse of a international criminal process.
Mr. Owen?
Well, as you mentioned in your introduction, in addition to the problems that Israel is facing as a state, as a government, the people who are in senior positions and have been filling those positions in previous military campaigns are at risk, because they are traveling around the world. They have no idea whether a secret warrant has been issued against them, and many countries, as well as the Interpol, may try to arrest them. Now, they may have diplomatic immunity, but they are going to face problems. And we already had some serving officers, as well as retired generals and cabinet ministers who reached the United Kingdom, for instance, and then they were warned that they should take the first plane back home rather than risk some proceeding, which they may win eventually, but it's going to become a hassle and a political liability for Israel. So
As we remember, of course, with the former foreign minister of Israel, Tzipi Livni, which was also one of those cases.
yes, and General Doron Almog and others.
Not in the ICC, though.
Yes, but the question is under the heading The Hague, which is hovering over everybody's heads, they are supposed to think twice before issuing or following an order. But another point is that the Israeli legal system is quite revered throughout the world, or at least the Western world, because of its professionalism and independence. And as long as this system is seen as doing its job in investigating and, if need be, prosecuting potential war criminals, then the world is going to let Israel go. But as of late, Israeli politicians, of all people, have attacked this system, not because of this particular issue, but for their own private interests. And this may cause the Attorney General, the prosecution, and eventually the court system of Israel to be less reliable as seen from outside.
Dr. Moodrick-Even, Khen, how do you perceive that?
Yes, it is important to say that there are two preconditions for admissibility under the ICC. And one of them that Amir Oren was talking about is what is called complementarity. That is to say that the ICC would be a subsidiary court, that it would first apply to the states, whether the states whose nationals are suspects of committing a crime, or states in whose territory a crime has been committed, and would ask them to investigate and to proceed with an investigation and then with a trial. But of course, there is the risk that these investigations or trials would not be implemented in good faith, and this is why complementarity the court would be subsidiary only if the state proceeds in good faith. So up to now, it seems that Israel has been acting in good faith, but the question is whether the ICC is going to see that this way or not.
Professor Sabel, your perception?
I'd like to add that the Palestinians have made two complaints. One about the treatment, the behavior of the Israeli army in Gaza, and clearly, if there's an offense has been committed, the Israeli legal system acts against them in the same way as every democratic state. What they feel happy about is the settlement issue, because clearly nobody in Israel has been prosecuted for building a settlement. We don't regard it as a crime. And here they think, there's no complementarity. However, it's such a political issue that the court shouldn't be touching it. That's the problem, because it's really a political. Wherever the future boundary will be, there's nothing inherently illegal about building a house. It's not a murder. It doesn't harm anybody. And the legal issue which we'll be raising are there legal relationship between Israel and a body which we don't regard as a state? Many other countries, including the United States and Great Britain, don't regard Palestine as a state. Can there be treaty relations? And they'll have to decide on this very tricky legal issue. Can you force a state to have treaty relationship with an entity which it doesn't recognize?
Nevertheless, when we listened to the wording of the chief prosecutor, she referred to the Palestinian Authority as the State of Palestine rather than...
The court refers to it.
There's two separate issues here. Does the ICC regard them as a state? And the answer is yes. Does that mean that Israel, which doesn't regard them as a state, should be in a treaty relationship with them? And I think we have a very strong answer, no. We don't recognize them, and therefore they have no right to appeal against us to the court. And we can't talk about their territory. Nobody knows what their territory is. It'll have to be negotiated. Hopefully we will negotiate with them in the future. We haven't done it yet. So in the meantime, their court will be having to decide that there's a Palestinian state, what its territory is and what its future boundaries be. They shouldn't be doing this.
It's very complicated because in Gaza, of course, the Palestinian Authority does not rule and has not since 2006, a few months after Israel withdrew from the territory. Hamas is in charge there, and Hamas has also been cited by the prosecutor for potential or alleged war crimes, which, of course, it has not investigated. But the problem in the West Bank or Judea... And
Why, of course?
Because Hamas is definitely not a state of Palestine or another state of Palestine.
Nevertheless, in 2006, it was the entity who won the election within the so-called state of Palestine.
Yes, but it has never split officially from the Palestinian Authority, whose capital is in Ramallah. In practice, yes, there are two Palestinian entities, which is why it's so complicated. Hamas may be guilty of war crimes without being a state or part of the state. But regarding what Professor Sabel referred to earlier, in the West Bank or Judea and Samaria, there is the problem of transferring the occupying powers population into the occupied territory. This is rather than the settlement, the construction of the settlements, it's the very idea that Israelis have crossed over from the former armistice line into what used to be the West Bank annexed, no one recognized it except Great Britain and Pakistan, annexed to the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. Again, a problem. What's the status of this West Bank if there is no state of Palestine or Palestinian Authority? But I believe the issue they are concentrating on is that an occupying power should not transfer or let its population move into the territory.
If I can add, this was not a grave crime under the Geneva Conventions. Because it was and for instance, if you take, would it be a crime if somebody from Switzerland or somebody from Finland moved in there? That wouldn't be. Only if an Israeli, it's a political issue to try and preserve the rights of the previous sovereign, and there was no previous sovereign here. So, in other words, it comes back to the point, should the court a criminal court be dealing with a political issue? And I don't think the answer is no.
Dr. Moodrick-Even, Khen, your position?
Yes, I agree with Professor Sabel, and I also wanted to mention that Perhaps, I mean, when Professor Sabel said that it is important to remember the purpose of establishing this court to deal with those crimes that shock the conscience of humanity, and also it is defined in the statute itself that the court should deal with the most serious crimes. And maybe we could cling to the case to the investigation that Fatou Bensouda did for the Marmara flotilla from Turkey to Gaza, and there was an investigation of the incident and the clashes between the Israeli soldiers, the Israeli army, and those who were on the Marmara ship vessel, and there were and the court, and I mean the investigation suggested that crimes have been committed, crimes against humanity or war crimes, and then the prosecutor decided not to proceed with the investigation because she decided that these crimes were not the most serious crimes. So perhaps this would also go for the settlement issue.
I'd like to ask you, Professor Sabel, what is Israel's line of defense beyond the demand not to politicize the ICC, considering the fact that if the court does accept Chief Prosecutor Bensouda's position, in which she said that she's satisfied with the Palestinian position vis-a-vis the so-called alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity of Israel, what will Israel then do?
Well, it's dangerous to prophesy in the Middle East. My guess would be we will fight on the jurisdiction issue. We'll say the court has no jurisdiction. And the arguments we'll make is this is not Palestinian territory, it's not a state, we have no treaty relations with it, nobody knows what their borders are, it's not a serious crime. But we won't, I think, go into the actual settlement issue because that would be, to a certain extent, conceding the jurisdiction of the court. So my personal guess is, I don't know what the government position would be, we will object to the jurisdiction, we will raise arguments. If we're defeated, I don't think we'll actually go in and argue on the substance of it.
Dr. Moodrick-Even, Khen, would you agree with that?
But from what I picked up from Fatou Bensouda's declaration, she's not going to go only to investigate the settlement issues. She does talk about these protestations on the fence. Yep. And what has happened there, and the Palestinians should remember. I hope this would be done in good faith on her behalf. That they are here to be investigated as well, because she is supposed to investigate the situation. It is not only in relation to who has complained, and the situation includes those crimes or those allegations against Palestinians, and it is also mentioned in her declaration.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Oren.
This is only the current, most recent example of Palestinian efforts to make the political and the legal intertwine as a weapon against Israel. Of course, there are other issues such as the distinction between products made on the West Bank or in settlements and those in Israel proper, in order to try a wedge between Israelis and settlers, if one can be found. But the real issue behind it all is the Palestinians are trying to find some way to elevate their power to Israel's, because obviously they are the weak party. Militarily, they cannot win. They wanted to find some way, especially in international fora, to make Israel pay for its strengths.
Dr. Moodrick-Even, Khen, to what degree do you think that the Palestinians do have a certain precedent in light of their decision to move forward? And of course, they're using Resolution 2334 as a foundation for the matter of settlements. Do you believe that they will be able to convince the court, putting aside now the politicizing of the situation and Israel's side of things, how do they come forward with this situation?
Well, they first can, of course, rely on the fact that the ICC has accepted them as a state, and this is, I think, very important because they have been trying to be to get accepted to the court since 2009 after Operation Cast Lead, and at that point they didn't succeed, and only after Operation Protective Edge they have succeeded. and of course, because also the Palestinian Authority has gained the status of observer at the UN, this also assisted them in getting this status from the ICC. So I believe this is important. The question is whether the court is going to be convinced that the preconditions regarding jurisdiction and regarding the seriousness of the crimes and whether complementarity takes place here. These are going to be the issues that are going to decide whether to proceed with the investigation.
Professor Sabel, would you agree with that?
Yes, I would like to add 2 points. First of is, so far the court has only prosecuted, I think, 3 people, all Africans. And there seems to be a desire from them to get somebody who's not African. They tried with the United States and they were slapped on the hand. And they decided, no, we're not going to investigate the United States.
Also the United Kingdom.
And the same with the United Kingdom. They may think that Israel is an easier target, and therefore they're picking on Israel to prove that they're not only prosecuting Africans. Further point I'd make is further to what Amir said about the Hamas. I'm not sure the Palestinian Authority would be too sorry about seeing Hamas people prosecuted. And secondly, they can't claim complementarity because throwing rockets at Israeli civilian settlements is something they encourage. It's not a crime in the Hamas. If an Israeli soldier on purpose kills a civilian, we prosecute him. They applaud him. So there's no complementarity there.
Nevertheless, Mr. Oren?
Of course, the real issue behind it all is whether, even if the court reaches some decision and it is against Israel or any other country, can it enforce it? And in real practical terms, it cannot. This is not like the UN Security Council when the United States has a veto, but it is close to it in practical terms because we have seen that Ms. Bensouda's visa to the United States can be revoked, and there are penalties which can be focused on the very people in the court. It's not just an abstract institution. This is a place where people want to make a living, to thrive, and to visit the United States, and there are ways to combat them. But it is a way to harass Israel. This is all another part of a harassment campaign in order to make the world remember that there is a problem. There are many other problems in the Middle East. ISIS, the Syrian civil war, Iraq, Iran, and what have you. But there is still this lingering problem, and one has to devote some energy to it. This is the Palestinians' real aim.
I'd like also to take this opportunity to ask a question with regard to the Jordan Valley. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has declared that following the election, he plans on annexing this territory and officially asserting Israeli sovereignty over the entire strip of land for security reasons, something that, of course, his biggest rival, if you will, Blue and White Chairman Benny Gantz, also stated that he will do, even though there are some differences in his own party or alliance of parties. Is Israel in a position right now on the state of international law, if you will, to actually exercise such a move?
Well, I'm quite sure it would not be regarded as legal in terms of international generally. But of course, if it is supported by the United States, then this is different in the diplomatic arena. So I guess they would have to check the position of the United States and probably coordinate it with the U.S. position.
Professor Sabel?
We have an agreement with the Palestinians. Neither side will change anything. The Palestinians have violated it. They've declared a state which they shouldn't have done. The question is, should Israel also violate it? My personal opinion is not. In other words, we have to negotiate the issue, and the issue should be negotiated with the Palestinians. Security-wise, we have absolute right to be there. To apply Israel law, which would mean annexing it, I think we should not do it. We should try and negotiate with the Palestinians. The tragedy of the Palestinians, they're not willing to sit and negotiate a border, and this is the crux of the matter. And instead of spending their time on trying to harass Israel as a matter, they should be sitting with us, making difficult decisions, and so far, they haven't done it.
Mr. Owen?
There is, of course, a reason why no prior Israeli government, including the four which Netanyahu has headed, tried to do it. Neither did retired General Benny Gantz recommend it when he was in charge of the military. And there are two basic reasons for it. One is nominal, you may say. Peace with Egypt and Jordan is predicated on UN Security Council Resolution 242 and then 338 or 9, doesn't really matter. We shouldn't have a unilateral move on it. Yes, the Golan Heights were annexed or at least brought under the Israeli administration in 1981, and Egypt did not break its agreement with Israel, which was not yet in force at the time. But this is something else. This is the Jordan Valley, which is bordering the Kingdom of Jordan. The Jordanian king, Abdallah, has serious political problems. There is excellent security cooperation between the Israeli military and intelligence communities and their Jordanian counterparts. But the Jordanian population does not support peace, and there are problems having to do with Jerusalem and other issues. So Israel shouldn't make it any harder on Jordan, and Jordan will probably not be able to withstand it. And the Americans have a stake in Jordan, which is a buffer state between Iraq and therefore Iran and Israel, in Jordan remaining stable. So one doesn't really see it happening.
We're drawing near to the end of the program. Closing statements, Dr. Moodrick-Even, Khen.
Well, I think that there is a risk that the ICC would proceed with an investigation. Israel can still make it very difficult for it to conduct such an investigation if it would not cooperate with the court, and then it would be harder for the office of the prosecutor to come to Israel and conduct the investigation.
Last sentence, Professor Sabel.
Two requests. A, the court shouldn't enter a political field, and the Palestinians should spend their time in trying to build a society, reach an agreement with us, not simply try spending their money and effort harassing us.
Well, this is all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank Dr. Moodrick-Even, Khen, Mr. Oren, and Professor Sabel for being here with us today. And I'd like to thank our viewers as well, and we will see you next time.
You just watched TV7 Jerusalem Studio. We encourage you to pray for the challenges raised in today's program. If you were blessed by our production, please consider supporting TV7 Israel. The details of our respective bank accounts for donations from Europe and the United States appear on the screen. Your generosity allows us to continue to serve God's calling, to broadcast content that truly matters through TV7 Israel from Jerusalem.